Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about one of the most important tools for programmers, the array, and how the array is a way to store a collection of items. Arrays allow us to keep multiple values in a single variable. Let's get started. Now, arrays allow us to have a single variable that holds multiple values. Now, all of these values in the array must be of the same type. Now imagine we have a video game and there are different types of enemies in the video game. Now imagine that you assign an integer value to each enemy type just to be able to identify it. So out of these four enemies here, our skeleton would be 0, the flying eye monster would be 1, the mushroom would be 2, and the goblin would be 3. Now we have these four different types of enemies, each one with an integer assigned to it for identification, and let's say in our video game each enemy deals a different amount of damage. Now we could have a variable for the damage for each type of enemy. Let's say we store these in doubles. Now this is one way to do it, but we'd have to have four different variables, one for each type of enemy. Now, what if instead we could have a single variable called damage, which can store the damage value for each enemy type? We can do this with an array. An array is declared like this. You must decide the type that you would like to store in the array. For example, we can have an array of doubles. So we declare an array by saying double followed by the name of the array. And in square brackets, we provide the size of the array. This is the number of elements in the array. So this line here creates an array of size 4. Now each of the values that we store in the array are called elements, and they're assigned index values starting at 0. Now this line creates an array called damage with 4 double values, but they're uninitialized. So how do we initialize the array? Well, we do so by accessing one of the elements using square brackets along with an integer value for the index of the element. We refer to the square brackets here as the array index operator, and the index determines which array element to access. We can then use the assignment operator to store a value in that element at the assigned index. So to assign a value to the array element at index 1, we would use the array index operator with a 1 inside and assign a value using the assignment operator. We can assign values to each of the elements in the array in this manner. Now, we need to keep in mind that our array only has 4 elements. So we can't try to access the 5th element. To do so would unravel the very fabric of the space-time continuum and destroy the entire universe. Actually, to do so would be undefined behavior. You see, we're attempting to access a location in memory that's not allocated by our array. It could be used by some other part of your program. So assigning a value out of bounds of that array is a bad idea and could result in undefined behavior. So your challenge is to create an array. Create an array of size 2 and call this array window dimensions. Do this just inside the main function, right at the top. Initialize the first element, element 0, to 512, and initialize element 1, the second element, to 380. Now, pass window dimensions into init window, accessing the first and second elements using the array index operator with the index passed in that corresponds to that array element. Pause the video and give this a try. Okay, so here's our program and here's the main function. Now, right here at the top, we're going to create a new array. So let's go ahead and create an array of integers. We need to use the int keyword, and we're going to call this array window dimensions. Now, this will be an array of size 2, so we have to use the square brackets with a 2 inside. Now, in order to assign a value to the first element, we need to use the array name, window dimensions, and the array index operator. Now, the first element is the element with the index 0, and we're going to use the assignment operator to give that element a value of 512. Next, we're going to access the second element by using window dimensions with the array index operator, and the second element is element 1 in the array, since the array starts at 0, of course. And for this element, we're going to give it the value 380. Now, we're going to pass these into init window instead of our window width and window height integers. So for the width, we're going to use window dimensions at index 0. So we're going to replace window width here with the first element of window dimensions. We can read this expression as window dimensions of 0. For window height, we're going to use window dimensions of 1. And now init window will have the values 512 and 380 for the width and height, just like it did before, only it's using the values from our array instead of our integer variables. So let's go ahead and hit run and start debugging. And here's our program working just as we've expected it to. Okay, so before we wrap this up, now that we're using window dimensions instead of our window width and window height, we can go ahead and delete these, but we will have to replace any instance of window width and window height once we do so. So let's go ahead and delete these variables, and instead we're going to use window dimensions for the window width and window height. Let's scroll down, and here in nebdata, we see the use of window width and window height. So we'll replace window width with window dimensions of 0 and window height with window dimensions of 1 here. And we'll do the same thing here in neb2 data. Now scrolling down, we see that we're using window width and window height here in Scarfy's anim data variables as well. So let's go ahead and replace those. And scrolling down, we use window height here when we're performing the ground check. Let's go ahead and replace that with window dimensions of 1. And I believe that's all the replacements we need to make. Finally, hitting run and start debugging to make sure it runs still, we see that our program works as expected. So in summary, we've learned how to create arrays which allow us to store multiple values in a single variable. We created an array for the window dimensions and use that now instead of the window width and window height variables. And now we have a single variable to hold the window dimensions rather than two. We also learned that we should never index an array out of bounds because the array has only allocated memory for the elements that we've specified when we chose the size of the array. To index an array out of bounds would result in undefined behavior, such as a crash. In the next video, we're going to learn about how we can use arrays to be more efficient with multiple values in our code. I'll see you then.